Before the NBA could scale, it had to fix one hidden problem. Most startups, nonprofits, for profits, both of them, never see this one problem. And when I say startup, I mean the stage of business, not the time frame that you've been in business, right? You could be in business a decade and still be in startup mode because what we're referring to in this particular episode, and actually what people refer to when they say startup in general, has more to do with revenue, profit, team size, etc. Right? And if this one thing isn't fixed early, scaling doesn't just get harder, it actually accelerates your breakdown. One of the things that I said I was going to be doing more of this year was book reviews, and not necessarily reviewing entire books, but just pulling out elements of the books that I read, right? Everyone knows I'm a big reader, right? I have a bit of a book problem, right? But in previous years, I did not really share a lot about the books and the content that I was reading. Mostly I would read, apply them to my own life, apply them to my, own clients and my own programs, and that's it. But this is one of the changes that I made to my content this year, where I would be sharing more from the books that I read. Okay. So if you want to know how the story of the NBA, particularly the startup story of the NBA, relates to you and your startup journey, this is your episode. Okay. So for context, the NBA started in 1949. Okay. And when it started, it had 17 different teams. Okay. What's crazy though is that by the following year, not 5 years, 10 years later, but by the very next year, so in NBA world, they operate in seasons, obviously. So by season two, they had went from 17 teams to 10. Well, why? Why did they drop 7 teams? Then over the next few years, they would go down 2 more to 8. And it's like, well, why is there this steady decline where they lost literally over 50% of their teams? Okay. Stick with me because I'm going somewhere with this. Okay. So, a big part of the reason is because the NBA allowed, so for context, the NBA is basically run like a franchise model. Okay. So, each team owner was an independent owner and they were given permission to move their teams around, meaning from different cities and different states, in hopes that they would find a city, a state, an audience that really loved their team, right? That was the entire purpose of allowing teams to move around, is to see if they could find a home in a bigger city, in a more sports related city, right? Which is not a crazy idea, right? What they were trying to do is increase attendance because the primary way that they made money back then when they first started, which is different now, is through ticket sales, right? So it makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways uh to say, okay, if we need to increase attendance, it would be great if we were in a big city as compared to, a small city or a small town. Unfortunately, that plan did not work. Right? What actually happened is they lost over half their teams. Like I said, owners gave up. They found it too hard, right? Sometimes teams moved multiple cities before they ever found a home. And the reason why I'm telling you this story, for 2 reasons. Number one, if there is one thing that we should be urgent around, right? I'm not big on scarcity and FOMO and any of those as tactics, right? But the truth is, we all should have a level of urgency around finishing what we were called to do, around finishing, right, what we have started, because we don't know the day or the hour whether we got 2 years on this planet or 20 years on our planet. So we should be operating with a level of urgency, okay? And when I say urgency, we're just talking about time, right? Time is the one resource that is not renewable. Every other resource that people have, money, energy, motivation, support, et cetera, it renews, right? It's limited, but it does renew. Time is the one that doesn't. And especially for those of you who are over 40, which is the majority of my audience, right? We feel that urgency even more, right? So the idea that the NBA started this company, they merged in 1949 with another league and started the NBA. And for the first several years was losing money, right? Losing money, losing profitability, all because I'm going to show you a solvable problem, okay? And not only did they lose revenue for the first several years, lose half their teams, but it took them 21 years to get back to 17 teams. It was not until 1970 that they were able to get back to the original 17 teams that they started with, right? So one, we need to be very mindful of time, right? We ain't got all day, okay? The second thing I'm going to take a little longer to explain because this is the even bigger point. Because the question is, well, why did this happen? Was it avoidable or did they just have to go through it? Right? Because there are some things that we have to go through in order to get to where we want to be. And then there are other things where it's like, oh, we never needed to go through that, right? We either got in our own way or misunderstood something or whatever it was, right? And sometimes it's not clear, it's not easy to know the difference between that was a necessary lesson that I needed to learn versus that was a self-imposed lesson that I did not need to learn, right? And so that was the original questions that I was thinking about as I was reading this book. Well, was it growing pains, right? And many times we as people we just accept a lot of things that are simply not true, simply not necessary. Even if something is normal, it doesn't mean it's necessary, right? And some of the most expensive mistakes in business come from believing things that are normal are also necessary, right? It's like the difference, we start talking about like settling and tolerating things that we should not. Right. So think about the things that you've heard in business, right? Oh, it takes months before anything starts working. Is that true? Is that a universal truth? Or is it just normal? Because there are plenty of people who start a business and get inquiries, sales calls, revenue, all the things within shorter times, right? I see this a lot with content. And it's like, oh, you just need to be consistent with your content for, months on end. And eventually, it'll take off. That's not completely untrue. But what about the people who don't spend months pushing content and end up making money from one or two posts? That lets us know that it is normal, but not necessary, right? Think about the other thing that I'm thinking about that I hear a lot is growth is always slow in the beginning. And it's like, that's not true. It can be slow in the beginning. It's also normal for it to be slow in the beginning. But I also know lots of people who started a business and that was not their story. So again, normal, not necessary, right? The first year is supposed to be, work hard, grind. Normal, not necessary. You just have to stay patient and keep showing up. You get the point, right? So let me tell you the second part of the story, which illustrates the point that I want you to take from this. So as I mentioned, their primary source of revenue was ticket sales, right? So what they were essentially trying to do is constantly trying to market their product. In this case, their product was their teams, right? Same thing that we are trying to do, constantly market our products. And it wasn't until they hired an outside consultant, right? Because what ended up happening is that in 1950, they hit rock bottom. And their rock bottom, while it had some financial rock bottom to it, what they primarily meant was they had the lowest scoring game that they had ever had. The score was 19-18. And if you know anything about sports, anything about basketball, well, we're closer to the hundreds, over 100. So 19-18 is just crazy. It's craziness. Okay. So that was in 1950 where they hit rock bottom. It wasn't until 1954, which is, when you think about this from a time perspective, how long it took them to solve this problem. But it wasn't until 1904 that they hired a consultant, right, to try to figure out, man, how do we get things on track? The consultant was Peter Drucker at the time, right, who helped them see what their real problem was, right? And in short, the biggest problem the league faced went beyond location of the franchise. It went beyond scheduling of home games in major arenas. It even went beyond competition, right? Oftentimes we think our issue is competition, right? But so this is why I love this story, because it's such a reminder that none of those were their real problems, right? So in 1954, what changed things is they hired the consultant. The consultant helped them see that they were in essence solving the wrong problem, right? Didn't use those words, but that was in essence, what the issue was. And so in 1954, they came up with the 24-second shot clock, right? And what they realized is that the problem wasn't revenue, right? They were focused on the fact that, oh, we need more attendance. Our primary revenue stream is ticket sales. That's not a crazy thought. But their problem wasn't revenue, right? The problem was the games were boring and slow. But when they instituted the 24-second shot clock, then the very next game that they played after instituting that rule, the actual score of the game went to 98-95, which is a huge difference between 19 and 18, right? There were additional changes that they made after the 24-second shot clock, but they credit much of their success to changing this rule. Why? Because it sped up the game. Okay. It made the game much more exciting. And they're in the entertainment business, right? A big part of what we need to be able to understand as entrepreneurs is what business we're really in, right? Because if they're in the entertainment business and their product is slow and boring, well, how well are people being entertained? Not very well. Well, then that would make sense in attendance and ticket sales. So I say all of this to say the problem that the NBA had and the problem that you likely have as well, because it's one of the biggest places that not only throw you off course, but also cost you months, years in time and thousands of dollars, just like it did with the NBA, is they named the problem wrong, right? They're focusing on the problem being revenue, but in fact, revenue was the goal. It wasn't the problem. Think about that for a second. A big part of what I do with my clients is I had multiple clients tell me this when I was asking for feedback. And it's like, well, part of what we love about you is that you get to the root, right? You don't solve the surface of a problem. Oftentimes I'm coming in, this is what they're saying. I'm coming in and I'm thinking I got one problem, but then when you listen to me, like, oh, that's not your real problem. And it's like, oh, that's one of the things that we love. And this is the same exact thing that we're talking about here. Okay, so let me use an example. So let's think of some things that are pretty common goals. Let's say you want to lose weight. Okay, that's a common goal. Or let's say you want to make more money, also a common goal in business, right? The question is, what is the real problem that you have? What is the main problem that you have? Yes, you have multiple problems, whether you're trying to lose weight or whether you are trying to make more money, right? But just because you have multiple problems, all of those problems are not equal. And if you spend all your time trying to solve the problems that are smaller or less significant, but you don't actually solve the main problem, then you end up not getting to where you want to be, right? A good book. So first of all, the book that I was reading about the NBA is called The NBA Story for anybody who, is also a reader. But another good book to read that really digs into this is called The Crux, right? It's all about being able to articulate and identify the number one constraint that's keeping you from your goal, right? The tricky part is so a big part of what we're talking about is strategy, right? A lot of times I hear, especially in this new age of, entrepreneurship where people like to say the word nervous system 47 times. Um, Oftentimes what I hear is that strategy is not important. Strategy, is not important. It's your identity. You really need to focus on your nervous system. And it irritates me because what we're talking about right now is just strategy. The NBA lost money for years, took 21 years to get back to where they started because of lack of strategy, not identity. Now, to be clear, identity is important, right? I do think identity gets in the way, but to act as if strategy is not important or that it barely matters or anything, and it's like you could cut, I mean, decades of time off your timeline with better strategy. So we're not going to downplay strategy like it's not important. It's just that identity is also important. It does not have to be either or, right? That's what I want you to hear. The challenge is that strategy is not as easy as people think. It's not usually the obvious or it's not usually the first answer that comes up, which is why so many people miss it or get it wrong. Because strategy requires brain power that planning does not. We often confuse planning and strategy, right? But planning is like a to-do list. That does not take nearly the same kind of brain power as strategy does, right? If you want to reach your 2026 goals, solve the biggest problem, right? And that starts with naming the problem correctly, friend. Someone asked me, man, why don't we? He's like, that's a simple concept. That makes perfect sense. Why couldn't I have gotten that? And it's like, oh, your brain is working against you, friend. That's why you could not understand this concept. That's the same reason why the NBA had to hire an outside consultant to help them solve the problem, even though some would say it was obvious or some say it was small or some would like however you might describe it. It's like, yes, but your brain is actively working against you. That's why people hire coaches and consultants and, all these different types of experts, right? Because it is not helping you in the way that we hope that it helps us. It's just trying to keep us safe, right? Like that's what our brain is here to do. And when you try to go off and do something new, it's like, oh, that does not feel safe. Does not feel safe, right? And so a big part of why we can't see things as strategically as we would like is because our brain is working against us. Not to mention the fact that the average entrepreneur is making hundreds of decisions. They have lots of different things coming at them. Like that's a whole different problem other than your brain just wanting to keep you safe. And as a result, you end up costing you lots of money and lots of energy and lots of time. All right. So I say all of this to say, in closing, as they would say in church, my second closing, okay? You can either spend the next fill in the blank 5 years, 21 years, if we go by the NBA standards or the NBA story, either struggling, going backwards, being at a plateau, or you can just let me help you. Let me help you be more strategic and solve things much faster. We have a group program that is very cost effective, right? Does not cost a lot of money. Have you could do a VIP day, right? Which is going to be more expensive, right? It's one on one, but it's not terribly expensive, right? These are not $1 million things, right? But either way, so if you're interested in either one of those, then just DM me on Facebook and we can talk, right? Because strategy is a big part of how you cut down on your time. Think about what your goal is in your business. Are you trying to change a system, right? Maybe you're an impact driven person and you're trying to change a system. Maybe you're trying to help 1,000 women, I don't know, lose 50 pounds, whatever it is that you're going after, I can guarantee you that there's a faster way than what you're taking right now. It just requires more strategy, friend.